Hi, I'm Louise Messier, nutritional therapist, and I've been working with Nurture Me Day Nursery for a few months now to look at their menu development and to talk to them about how nutrition links with many aspects of formative development and these crucial stages of a child's early life within the setting. So nutrition plays a really big role, but specifically in this video series, we are looking at the nutritional considerations for autistic populations because there are some differences in terms of food presentation, which I think most people are aware of, but there are also some more sort of biological differences that we should be aware of and just consider in terms of whether a child is getting overly anxious about something and what might the reason behind that be. And that can be exacerbated within autistic populations. So I'm just going to go through the first in this series, which is looking at probably the most common underlying issue for children within autistic populations, and that is a GI disorder or gastrointestinal. And we don't know why, but for some reason children within autistic populations are more prone to GI disorders, so they're more prone to tummy upsets and uncomfortable tummies. I'm not exactly sure why. There's lots of research we're making different links to different things, but I'm not here to go into that. I'm just kind of here to look at what might the practical steps be around those sort of uncomfortable tummy issues and what might that make the child feel like? And if we can recognize that, how can we work with that, understanding that there might be a real reason why they can't sit still or behave in a certain way around food, and also what kind of typical characteristics might present within autistic populations that are sort of a bit unusual, shall we say, around food, but are quite common within autistic populations, but also what might those things do to a child's health and particularly their digestion, which is what we're focusing on in this subject. So obviously any tummy upset, which we'll know from ourselves, will hinder the enjoyment of food. So if we feel that our tummy is hurting, being presented with food can be quite a challenge. It can be quite upsetting. It can certainly increase stress and anxiety, and we're certainly not going to want to eat the food, but we may not be able to articulate that, maybe non-verbal, may just be not able to articulate that in any way. So to look for the characteristics and not force the food. That's one thing that is sort of clear throughout the series, is that we don't force the food. There is lots of evidence to show that the more we force the child to try to eat, no matter how much we think that they surely must be hungry, it will just increase their stress response and that they will not respond well to food, and it will also hinder that relationship going forward in terms of the trust. So we don't want to ever force or push or keep pushing when they're clearly stressed around the food. And I know that's really hard because we as grown-ups are generally feeders and we want children to eat and to be nourished, and we want to see them, if they haven't eaten for a long time, we can feel that we really ought to try to get something in them. So it is a very difficult balancing act. So it definitely would hinder the enjoyment, but also it can hinder their ability to sit at the table. So if we think, oh, they must sit at the table to eat, they may be really uncomfortable sitting at the table. It may be really squashing their tummy. They may be really uncomfortable. They may be constipated, in which case sitting down is also very uncomfortable. So there may be certain biological things going on that are making it really difficult for them to be around food, to be in that food area. So there are lots of, as I said, there are lots of sort of common GI disorders which are more common within autistic populations, and that can often be the underlying reason. There are many other reasons, and there are many other food issues and a lot of sensory issues obviously around food, which we'll cover in a different video, and the different PDFs to support these videos. But underlying reason, if there's something going on biologically, that's normally the underlying reason for other things, and that's true for everybody, you know, that's true for grown-ups and all children alike. So if there's something going on biologically, it will hinder the other aspects first and foremost. So if you are being repeatedly offered food and it caused you physical pain, that's what it's like for children who have these GI disorders, upsets going on, and it can be really difficult for them to voice that, obviously. So there are some things to look out for, things that I'm sure people who work in early years and parents with children within the autistic population will be familiar with. Pica, eating things that are not food. It can be really frustrating when we think, oh, this child won't eat food, but they seem to eat crayons or mud or anything else that isn't food. It's quite common. It's obviously not the healthiest of things. There's not a lot of nutritional intake going on there, but it is also quite a risk for choking. Obviously, if you think how carefully we manage food in early years settings, and when we're chopping food for children at home, we're really careful about the portion size, about checking for foreign things in there like bones in fish, etc. We're really careful with that. When a child is just going along and picking things up and not necessarily eating them, but just having them in their mouth, they may not actually swallow them, they may just have them in their mouth, but that is still a choking risk. And if they do swallow them, those foreign bodies are not metabolized, they're not digested properly, so they can cause obstructions in the bowel, and that could be an uncomfortable feeling, obviously a really uncomfortable feeling that there is an obstruction there, and it's not going to go through the normal bodily process, because it's not something that the body would naturally know what to do with. It's not going to take it for energy, it's not going to take it for waste, it doesn't know what to do with it. So that could cause an obstruction that could be really uncomfortable for that child. Obviously something to watch out for and something to monitor. Keeping a log is really useful as well, as in terms of if there's a pattern of things that they go for, then we can look at textures and things like that and kind of think if they're going for something of that texture, let's try food of that texture and those sorts of things. So it's really common, but there are ways of sort of monitoring and measuring it. But the biggest thing there is the choking risk and the risk of a bowel obstruction if they are actually ingesting the items that they're finding and eating. Cramming. This is another thing that children can do, which is kind of just, it's almost like just shoving it in without sort of stopping to breathe. So when we eat and we digest, we tend to have to take a breath often to actually enable the body to chew it and to swallow it and then to breathe before we take the next lot in. Obviously, when we don't do that, we are more at risk of choking because we're just going for it. And it's not really known why. It could just be that they maybe want to get it done because they feel they have to eat to move on to the next thing, or it could just be a way that they deal with themselves. Not really known, but it could be anything that they're popping into their mouths without actually chewing it properly. So that's another thing to look out for. Constipation. Now, this is something that is really, really common with all children, regardless of whether they're in the autistic population or not. All children are much more likely to get constipation. So this is generally for all children. It can be more common within autistic populations because of some of the other issues that we're going to look at through some of the types of foods, and because of some of the other issues around food, and particularly around the issue of not drinking enough water, which is obviously a clear link there with constipation, but we'll cover that a bit later. But for all children, the more they put the fear of going to the toilet, because as soon as they're constipated, going to the toilet will hurt, going to the potty, it will hurt. And so that will make them anxious of going again, and that will make them become more constipated because they're holding it. And that's obviously quite difficult to manage with children. There are lots of ways that we can try to work with children on that, but to kind of get them to recognize that the more they hold it, the more it will hurt, and that's really quite difficult to do with small children. But we don't always need to go to, obviously there are sachets available that help to loosen and things like that. We don't always need to go to that. Obviously there is a time and place when that is absolutely necessary. We don't always need to go to that. There are ways of kind of nipping it in the bud if we catch it early on, and we can start to see a pattern developing. But definitely the big thing is water. Often children don't drink enough water, they don't like the taste of it, or they just forget to drink. Children are really bad sometimes at being so busy that they forget to drink, and that can obviously cause the constipation to get worse. But some of the restricted diets that children on the autistic spectrum will have will perhaps lead to constipation being more likely as well, because of the lack of fiber. So that there are certain foods, and we know that we'll cover this in a different video, but we know that there are certain foods, beige foods, that are very popular and are often the safe foods, but they're lacking in fiber. So they're lacking the sort of the bulk that we need for the poo, to help the poo to flow freely through the body. So there are issues with the limitations of some diets that will exacerbate constipation there as well. Stress and anxiety, the biggest thing with children, all children, is that fear and anxiety will shut down hunger. So they're more stressed they are, that there is no chance that they will eat. So recognizing and having diaries of the children's behavior. So we know that certain children do not like a swift transition. So if we're doing something and then suddenly it's mealtime or snack time, That's really stressful for some children. Many will just, okay, fine, put their stuff down and toddle off and go to have the snack. For others, they're so in the zone of what they're doing that the transition to food is very unwelcome. And so the food is not received well. They don't want to go to it. It's very stressful because they've been happy doing something. So being aware that some children will need a sort of slower transition and a gradual transition towards food, and a lead time for it, rather than just, right, this is stopping, this is starting, because that will enable them to get ready for the transition rather than it just being imposed right there and then. And if a child is more relaxed going into the food situation, it doesn't mean that they are going to eat it. There is no guarantee that they will, even if they're relaxed. There may be other issues going on. All of the GI issues, the sensory issues, all of those things may still be at play and may stop them eating. But we know first and foremost that if they are stressed, if they are anxious, if they are worried, if they are scared, if they are upset, in any way emotional, they will not eat. It will shut down hunger. And it will also potentially shut down hunger for longer, because they'll make the links with food being stressful. And they won't want to entertain the idea of food for some time, because they remember the feeling of being very emotional and stressed around that. Another issue which could cause some GI issues could be extreme taste sensations. Now, some children within autistic populations have a very bland palate, shall we say, and the beige foods are very safe, and we know that is generally the case, that beige foods are safe and they are the go-to, and I understand that completely. Of course, they're not the best nutritionally, but we have to feed children, so if they're a safe food, then they're a safe food, and that is absolutely fine. But other children within autistic populations they kind of have the opposite. They have an extreme palate expectation. So they can go for something that is really, really overly spiced. And we're very careful with spice with children. We introduce it very gradually, very slowly. We don't give them anything that's got too much spice in too soon, because we don't want it to be overpowering and to put them off for life. But some children don't have that. They want it really salty. They want it really spicy. They don't want it beige. They want that extreme taste sensation, which obviously is not too good either for the digestion. Children shouldn't have too much salt. We know that. So if they have the extreme taste expectation to want a lot of salt, that is something that we need to manage with flavor. So children should not be adding salt to their food because they want to get the taste expectation of something tasty. We can give them something tastier if they're in this bracket without the salt, because obviously too much salt is going to lead to other health issues, and because children are not exempt from picking up the same conditions that adults would get. If it's something spicy, too much spice can also lead to tummy upsets. Children are not really used to having really, really hot, spicy foods. They may be able to cope with it here, their palate may be okay with it, but their tummy might not be so happy with that. So that could also lead to GI, gastrointestinal issues, in terms of the extreme taste sensation that is present within some children there as well. Again, it could just be something as simple as it's uncomfortable to sit down and eat. Many children on the autistic spectrum will have some postural issues, that low muscle tone around the tummy. And if you imagine having sort of a really uncomfortable sort of skeletal frame sitting down, and especially if you're expected to kind of sit upright in a little chair, and you feel really uncomfortable doing that because it's actually not a very comfortable position for you to be in. And then that's your main thing, that's your main focus. The food you're being given is then just really not something that you're interested in, because you're really uncomfortable. And that will probably present itself as a child being really fidgety, not wanting to sit down, and just feeling being really sort of not wanting to be there, and really fidgety, and maybe getting up and down, or maybe shifting around a lot. That could be signs that they have a low muscle tone around their tummy and they are uncomfortable sitting down. So whilst it's not ideal, obviously we don't want to encourage children walking around and eating, because that's a choking hazard, and children mimic other children. So we don't want to then create a room full of children toddling around eating, because that's dangerous, that's hard to manage, that's a choking risk, etc., etc. But we do need to monitor these sorts of patterns of behavior with children. So if it's a repeat thing and they seem to be really uncomfortable sitting, take some notes, write things down, and think, what could we do differently? How could we maybe work with this uncomfortable seating position to make it more of a comfortable eating experience. And that will be different child by child, and always involve the families, because they will know the child. Obviously you will know the child well, working with them every day, but the parents will know them as well. So it's got working together is obviously much easier than thinking, well, we're going to do this here, something different could be happening somewhere else. And it's kind of better to try to do the same thing, as one thing might work for one and you might think, well, that will work for us too. So that was the autism nutrition population's subject of gastrointestinal GI issues. Within this series, there's also blood sugar regulation, new taste, which is all about that sort of palate development and trying to breach the safe foods, and food routines and sensory issues. So short webinar series. Take a look through which ones are the most prevalent to you, or take a look at all of them. There's also accompanying PDFs for you to have a look at as well. So not the answer to everything. Each child is different. Each child needs to be monitored and have the logs, and then you can work within that one child's remit. But general things to look for and general things to be aware of. Hopefully that's helpful, and I'll see you again soon.